The Gingerbread House. A quiet night of creation. It's late now, later than I usually stay awake, but there's something about this particular night that has called me to the kitchen. The house is silent around me, wrapped in that special kind of stillness that only comes after everyone else has gone to sleep. Outside the window above the sink, snow is falling in slow, lazy spirals, each flake catching the amber glow of the streetlight before disappearing into the white blanket below. Inside, the only light comes from the soft golden strips beneath the kitchen cabinets and the gentle multicolored shimmer of the Christmas tree in the next room, visible through the doorway, its lights twinkling in their patient, eternal rhythm. I've laid everything out on the kitchen table with a kind of reverent care. The surface is covered with a sheet of parchment paper, its edges curling slightly, and spread across this canvas are the components of what will soon become a small architectural wonder. The gingerbread pieces rest there, still fragrant from their baking days ago, each one a perfect geometric shape cut with precision. 2 rectangular walls with peaked tops. 2 more rectangular walls, these without peaks. 2 triangular roof pieces that will meet at an apex. And smaller pieces too. A rectangle for a door, tiny squares that might become shutters or decorative elements. The gingerbread itself is a deep, rich brown, the color of old leather or autumn earth. Running my fingertips across the surface of one wall, I can feel the slight texture there. The way the dough has settled and baked, creating an almost imperceptible landscape of tiny rises and valleys. The surface is smooth but not glossy, matte in a way that seems to absorb the warm light rather than reflect it. When I lift one piece close to my face, the aroma fills my senses completely. That unmistakable perfume of molasses and brown sugar, layered with the warm, complex spice of ginger, the sweet heat of cinnamon, the earthy depth of nutmeg, and just a whisper of cloves that catches at the back of my throat in the most pleasant way. Beside the gingerbread pieces, I've arranged my decorating supplies with the care of an artist preparing a palette. There are small glass bowls, each one catching and reflecting the cabinet lights, creating tiny pools of golden luminescence. Some are empty, waiting to hold icing in various consistencies. Others contain candies, sorted by color and type. The red and white peppermint rounds gleam like little jewels, their spiral patterns hypnotic. Gumdrops in every color imaginable, ruby red, emerald green, sunshine, yellow-orange like a sunset, purple like twilight, sit in neat rows, their sugar coating catching the light and making them sparkle as if dusted with the finest glitter. There are chocolate nonpareils, their dark surfaces studded with those tiny white beads that look like miniature pearls. Silver dragees rest in their own small dish, forbidden in some states for consumption, but perfect for decoration, each one a tiny, perfect sphere of metallic beauty. I've set out pretzel sticks that could become a fence or a ladder, their salt crystals visible even in this dim light. There's a small bag of shredded coconut that will serve as snow, its white strands already releasing their sweet, tropical scent even through the plastic. A container of sanding sugar, that specially coarse, sparkling sugar used for decorating, sits nearby. And when I unscrew the lid just to peek inside, I'm rewarded with a flash of crystalline brilliance, as if someone has captured stardust and made it edible. The centerpiece of tonight's work, though, rests in a larger mixing bowl covered with a damp kitchen towel. This is my royal icing, and I need to check its consistency before we begin. Lifting the towel away, I'm greeted by the pure, almost shocking whiteness of the icing beneath. It's the white of fresh snow, of clouds on a summer day, of possibility itself. The surface has that characteristic slight sheen, and when I drag a spoon through it experimentally, it parts smoothly, then slowly, ever so slowly, flows back together, leaving just the faintest trace of where the spoon traveled. But first, before any assembly, before any decoration, I need to prepare different consistencies of icing for different purposes. The batch I've already made will serve as the mortar to hold the house together. It needs to be thick, sturdy, capable of supporting weight without sliding. But for decorating, for the delicate piping and detail work, I'll need icing with more flow, more flexibility. I reach for the box of powdered sugar, its weight satisfying in my hands. The box has that slight, dusty feel that powdered sugar containers always have, and when I open the top, I can see the pure white powder within. So fine it's almost like flour, but sweeter smelling, with a faint vanilla undertone. I scoop several generous spoonfuls into a clean bowl, and with each scoop, a tiny cloud of sugar dust rises into the air, catching the light like mist. Now comes the water, added drop by careful drop. I use a small squeeze bottle, the kind that gives you absolute control, and I add perhaps 5 drops, watching them land on the powdered mountain, creating tiny craters that darken where the liquid touches. Then I begin to stir with a silicone spatula, and there's a particular kind of satisfaction in watching this transformation. At first, the mixture is lumpy and resistant, with dry pockets of sugar that seem determined not to incorporate. The spatula makes a soft scraping sound against the ceramic bowl, a gentle, rhythmic whisper that becomes almost meditative. Gradually, so gradually, the mixture begins to come together. The dry patches disappear, absorbed into the growing mass of icing. I add a few more drops of water, stir again, and watch as the consistency shifts from thick paste to something smoother, more homogeneous. The color remains that pure, brilliant white, but now it has a slight gloss to it, a sheen that suggests moisture and flow. I'm aiming for a consistency that will hold its shape when piped, but will settle just slightly, smoothing out any harsh lines. Testing is essential. I dip a spoon into the icing and hold it up, letting gravity do its work. The icing slides off the spoon, but not in a rush. It moves like honey, like syrup, forming a ribbon that folds back on itself when it reaches the bowl. Perfect. This is 10-second icing, named because when you drag a knife through it, the line should disappear in about 10 seconds as the icing flows back together. I make the test, dragging my spatula through the white expanse, creating a valley that immediately begins to fill, the sides slumping inward, and I count silently. 1, 2, 3. By the time I reach 9, the surface is smooth again, as if I'd never disturbed it at all. I prepare 3 different bowls of icing tonight. One remains thick. This is my glue, my mortar, the structural element that will give this house its stability. The second is the medium consistency I've just perfected, ideal for most decorating work. The third, I thin even further with careful additions of water, stirring after each drop until the icing flows freely from the spoon like thick cream. This will be for flooding techniques, for filling in large areas with smooth, glossy coverage. The piping bags wait nearby, disposable plastic bags that I've fitted with various metal tips. The tips themselves are small works of precision engineering, each one designed to create a specific effect. There's a round tip for clean lines and dots, a star tip for textured applications, a small leaf tip for creating foliage effects, and a tiny writing tip for the most delicate work. I fill the first bag about halfway with the medium consistency icing, being careful not to overfill. The bag has a particular weight to it once filled, and I spend a moment massaging the icing down toward the tip, forcing out any air bubbles that might interrupt my flow later. Then I twist the top closed and fold it over, securing it with a rubber band. The prepared bag rests in a tall glass, tip pointing up, ready for when I need it. Everything is ready now. The gingerbread pieces rest before me, patient and waiting. The icing is prepared in its various consistencies. The candies gleam in their bowls, a treasure trove of color and sweetness. My hands are clean and dry. I take a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the mingled scents of ginger and sugar and vanilla, and I feel something settle inside me, a kind of focused calm, a readiness, a sense of being fully present in this moment. Outside, the snow continues its silent fall, and inside, in this warm, golden cocoon of a kitchen, I'm about to begin creating something beautiful. There's no rush, no pressure, no deadline. There's only this moment, this process, this quiet joy of making something with my own hands, piece by piece, detail by careful detail. The first step in any gingerbread house is the foundation, the walls themselves, and this is where patience becomes paramount. I reach for the thick icing, my structural adhesive, and load it into a piping bag fitted with a large round tip. The bag is heavy now, substantial with its white cargo, and I can feel the slight give of the icing when I squeeze experimentally, testing my grip. I pick up one of the side walls, turning it in my hands, examining it from all angles. The edges are clean and straight where they were cut, and I can see the faint lines of a knife or pizza cutter where someone, myself though it feels like weeks ago now rather than days, scored and separated these pieces. The gingerbread is firm but not brittle, strong enough to stand but not so hard it might crack under pressure. I position my piping bag at one of the long edges, the one that will join to a perpendicular wall, and I begin to squeeze. The icing emerges in a thick, creamy line, and there's a slight resistance at first, a moment where I have to apply firm pressure to get the flow started, but then it comes smoothly, steadily. I pipe a generous bead of icing along the entire edge, perhaps a quarter-inch thick, and as I go, I can hear the soft whisper of the icing leaving the bag, a gentle sound, like a sigh or a breath. The line of white icing against the brown gingerbread is striking, and already I can smell the sweetness of it mixing with the spice of the cookie. I set this piece aside and pick up the second wall, the one that will join with it, and I repeat the process, piping another generous line of icing along the edge that will mate with the first piece. Now comes the moment of assembly, and this requires a steady hand and a bit of trust. I lift both pieces, one in each hand, and bring them together carefully, pressing the iced edges against each other. The icing squishes slightly under the pressure, and I can feel a bit of it oozing out from the seam, which is exactly what I want. This tells me I've used enough. Too little icing and the joint will be weak. Too much and it will slide everywhere. This is just right. I hold the two pieces together, maintaining gentle, steady pressure, and I count slowly to 30. This is the critical period, these first 30 seconds, when the icing begins its initial set. When the sugar crystals start to bond and lock together, my arms are extended, holding the pieces in place, and I can feel the slight strain in my shoulders, but it's not unpleasant. It's the kind of physical engagement that makes you aware of your body, of your strength, of your ability to create and shape and build. At 30 seconds, I test carefully, releasing just a fraction of the pressure. The pieces hold. Good, but I don't let go entirely yet. I maintain a lighter touch for another 30 seconds, just to be sure, and then, with great care, I set the connected pieces down on the parchment paper, propping them at an angle so they can stand. I repeat this process with the remaining two walls, creating a second corner, and then comes the more challenging part, connecting these two L-shaped sections into a complete rectangle. This requires more icing, more careful positioning, and more patience. I pipe generous amounts of icing on all the edges that will meet, and then I lift the entire first section and bring it toward the second. There's always a moment of uncertainty here, a brief second where everything feels precarious and unstable, where it seems like the whole structure might collapse into a pile of gingerbread shards and icing. But I move slowly, deliberately, making tiny adjustments until the edges line up perfectly. Then I press gently, holding everything steady, and once again I count. 30 seconds. The icing squeezes out at the seams, and I can see it there, bright white against the brown, already beginning to firm up, already doing its job. After a minute of holding, I very carefully place the structure down on the parchment, and for the first time, I can see the actual shape of the house. It's a rectangle now, open at the top, but unmistakably a house-shaped form. The walls stand straight and true, and when I test them with a gentle touch, they're remarkably stable already. Royal icing is miraculous in this way. It sets quickly enough to be practical, but slowly enough to allow for adjustments. But I'm not finished with the assembly yet. I need to let these walls set more completely before I attempt to add the roof, so I turn my attention to reinforcing the interior corners. Using the thick icing again, I pipe generous beads along each interior corner seam, running from bottom to top. These interior reinforcements aren't for appearance, no one will see them, but they add crucial structural integrity. The icing flows into the corners, filling any gaps, creating strong bonds. I use my finger, dampened slightly, to smooth these interior seams, pressing the icing firmly into place, and I can feel the slight tackiness of it on my skin, the way it wants to stick and bond. Now I wait. This is the hardest part for some people, this waiting. but I find a strange peace in it. I'm not idle. I use this time to prepare, to organize, to ensure everything will be ready for the next steps. I check my other icing bags, making sure the tips haven't begun to crust over. I arrange my candy decorations in a more logical order, grouping by color, by size, by intended use. I dampen a paper towel and place it over the opening of my main bowl of icing to prevent it from drying out. And I simply sit for a moment in this warm kitchen, listening to the silence of the house around me, watching the snow fall outside the window. There's a particular quality to late-night snow, the way it seems to absorb sound, to create a hush over the world. Each flake is unique, or so they say, though I can't make out individual flakes from here. They're just a general swirling pattern of white against the dark sky. After about 15 minutes, I test the walls again, pressing gently at a corner. They're solid now, really solid. The icing has done its work, transforming from a paste into something more like mortar, hard and unforgiving. Perfect. Now I can add the roof. The roof pieces are triangular, and they're larger than the wall pieces, which means they're heavier, which means the icing needs to be even more substantial to hold them. I pipe thick lines of icing along the top edges of the walls, creating a substantial bed for the roof to rest on, and then I pipe icing along the sloped edges of each roof piece where they'll meet at the peak. Positioning the first roof piece is an exercise in patience and spatial reasoning. I have to angle it just right, resting one edge on the top of the wall while the other edge will eventually meet its partner at the apex. I press it down into the icing, and immediately I see white icing squeeze out along the seam. Good. That's good. But now I have to hold it in place while I position the second piece, and this requires some creative problem solving. I've prepared for this, though. Earlier, before I even began, I set out several cans of soup from the pantry, and now I use these as props, carefully positioning them on either side of the roof piece to hold it at the correct angle. The can presses against the gingerbread gently but firmly, keeping it from sliding down while the icing sets. Now for the second roof piece, and this is even trickier because it has to align with the first piece at the peak. I position it carefully, pressing one edge down onto the wall icing, then slowly raising the other edge to meet its partner. The alignment is not perfect on the first try. There's a slight gap at one end, so I carefully lift it slightly and adjust, shifting it perhaps 1/4 of an inch to the left. Better. The edges meet now along their entire length. I hold this piece in place with one hand while I reach for another soup can with the other, positioning it as a prop. The roof piece settles into the icing, and now both sides of the roof are in place, meeting at the peak in what should be. I lean down to check. Yes, a perfectly straight line, perfectly. But there's a gap at the peak, which is expected and even desirable. I need to fill this with icing to create a waterproof seal. Metaphorically speaking, this house will never see rain. I take my thick icing bag and carefully pipe a generous line of icing along the entire peak, filling the gap, letting it ooze into any spaces. Then, with a small offset spatula that I've kept nearby for just such purposes, I smooth this ridge of icing, creating an even, rounded seam that looks almost like actual roofing material. The house is assembled now, structurally complete, and I feel a swell of satisfaction looking at it. It stands there on the parchment paper, a recognizable house shape, and even without any decoration, there's something charming about it, something that speaks to a fundamental human appreciation for shelter, for home, for safe spaces. But I can't begin decorating yet. The roof icing needs to set, needs to harden, or else the weight of the candy decorations might cause it to slip or sag. So once again, I wait. And once again, I find this waiting to be not frustrating but meditative, a natural pause in the rhythm of creation. I use this time to plan my decorating strategy. I'm envisioning a house covered in snow, naturally, with icicles hanging from the eaves. I want the roof to look like it's covered in overlapping shingles, perhaps made from those little chiclet-shaped candies, and I want the ridgeline of the roof to be piped with a thick line of icing that will dry into the perfect representation of snow accumulation. The walls, I think, will have a pebbled texture, created by piping small dots of icing in a random pattern and letting them dry. The door will be special, perhaps made from pretzel sticks arranged vertically to look like planks, with a little wreath above it made from green-tinted icing and red candy berries. As I plan, I begin to divide my medium consistency icing into several bowls, keeping most of it white, but tinting small portions with gel food coloring. I add just a tiny amount of green to one bowl, stirring it in with a clean spoon, watching as the white gradually transforms into a pale, minty green that reminds me of spring leaves or lime sherbet. For another bowl, I add the smallest touch of brown, creating an icing that's more cream-colored than white, which will be perfect for certain details that need to look more natural, less snow-like. The gel food coloring is thick and concentrated, and even a small amount creates vibrant color. I'm careful not to add too much. It's much easier to make icing darker than to lighten it again. The spoon makes soft sounds as I stir, scraping against the ceramic, and gradually the color disperses evenly throughout the white icing until there are no streaks, just pure, consistent color. 20 minutes have passed since I added the roof, and when I test it again, pressing very gently at the peak, there's no movement at all. The structure is solid now, ready to bear the weight of decoration. The soup cans have done their job, and I carefully remove them, setting them aside. Now finally, truly, the real creative work can begin. I decide to start with the roof, as it's the most visible part of the house and will set the tone for everything else. I pick up my piping bag filled with white icing, the medium consistency that will hold its shape but still flow smoothly. I've fitted this bag with a medium round tip, which will give me a line about the width of a pencil. Starting at the bottom edge of one side of the roof, I begin to pipe a straight, horizontal line of icing from one end to the other. The key to a straight line is confidence and consistency. Hesitation creates wobbles, and uneven pressure creates thick and thin spots. I squeeze with steady pressure, moving my hand in a smooth, continuous motion, and the line of icing emerges from the tip in a perfect white ribbon. When I reach the end, I release pressure and lift the tip cleanly away, leaving a professional-looking finish with no stray tails or blobs. This first line will serve as the foundation for my first row of shingles, and the sight of it there, white against brown, is deeply satisfying. The icing has a slight texture to it, not perfectly smooth, but with a softly rough surface that catches the light in interesting ways. I pipe a second line parallel to the first, about 3/4 of an inch above it, then a third, then a fourth, working my way up the roof in horizontal bands. The rhythm of this is hypnotic. Position the tip, squeeze, move smoothly across, release, lift away. Position, squeeze, move, release, lift. My breathing naturally syncs with the motion, and I find myself falling into a state of relaxed focus where nothing exists except this moment, this line, this precise application of icing. When I finish the first side of the roof, I step back to admire my work. The brown gingerbread is now striped with white, and already it looks more finished, more intentional. But these lines are just the beginning, the scaffolding for what comes next. I reach for my bowl of small rectangular candies. They're fruit-flavored, I think, though I'm not planning to eat them, just use them for their appearance. They're about the size of Chiclets gum, and they come in various colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. For a roof, I want to create a pattern that looks natural, but also visually interesting. So I decide to use shades of brown and red and orange, colors that might actually appear on a tiled roof. I pick up the first candy between my thumb and forefinger. It's smooth and slightly waxy, coated in that characteristic hard candy shell, and it has a pleasant weight to it, substantial but not heavy. I press it gently into the bottom line of icing, right at the edge of the roof. The icing accepts it easily, the candy sinking in just slightly, held firmly by the adhesive quality of the sugar. I place a second candy next to the first, then a third, working my way across the entire bottom row, pressing each piece into the icing with just enough force to secure it, but not so much that I squeeze all the icing out from underneath. The sound of each candy placement is quietly satisfying. A soft press, almost like a gentle tap, and then the subtle sense of the candy settling into place. My fingers develop a rhythm: pick up, position, press, release, pick up, position, press, release. The candies are cool against my fingertips, and occasionally one will stick slightly to my skin, requiring a gentle shake to release it. The first row complete, I begin the second row. But this time I offset the candies so that each one sits between two candies in the row below, like real shingles or tiles. This creates a more authentic look, a staggered pattern that's both aesthetically pleasing and structurally sound. If this were a real roof, which of course it's not, but the illusion matters. I work my way up the roof, row by row, and I start to play with color as I go. Mostly I'm using candies in shades of brown and amber, but occasionally I add in a red one or an orange one, creating a subtle variegated pattern that adds visual interest without being garish. The colors blend together in a way that reminds me of autumn leaves or sunset clouds. The process is time-consuming but never boring. Each candy requires individual attention, individual placement, and there's something almost meditative about this kind of repetitive, detail-oriented work. My mind settles into a calm, quiet state. I'm not thinking about tomorrow's obligations or yesterday's concerns. I'm fully here, fully present, focused entirely on the small rectangular candy between my fingers and the exact spot where it needs to go. As I near the peak of the roof, the rows become shorter. There's less space now, and I have to be more careful about alignment. The last row on this side of the roof consists of only 5 candies, and I place them with extra care, making sure they're perfectly aligned, perfectly positioned. Now I turn my attention to the second side of the roof, and I repeat the entire process. More horizontal lines of icing, piped with the same careful attention to consistency and straightness. More candies, pressed one by one into the wet icing, creating that same satisfying staggered pattern. My fingers are slightly sticky now with residual icing, and there's a faint tackiness to them, but it's not unpleasant. It's part of the process, part of the tactile experience of creation. When both sides of the roof are complete, shingled entirely with these colorful candies, I pause to appreciate what I've accomplished. The transformation is remarkable. What was once just plain brown gingerbread is now a textured, colorful, three-dimensional surface that actually looks like a miniature roof. The candies catch the light from the cabinet strips, some facets glinting while others remain in subtle shadow, and the overall effect is one of depth and realism. But I'm not finished with the roof yet. There's still the peak to address, that ridgeline where the two sides meet. This is where I want to create the impression of heavy snow accumulation, the way real snow would collect along a roof's highest point. I pick up my piping bag again, but this time I'm going to use a different technique. Instead of smooth lines, I'm going to pipe a thick textured bead of icing along the entire peak, and then I'm going to use a small offset spatula to texture it, creating peaks and valleys that mimic snowdrifts. Starting at one end, I squeeze out a generous amount of icing directly onto the peak line. The icing piles up there, thick and white and substantial, and I continue squeezing as I move along the roof's length, creating a continuous ridge of white that's perhaps half an inch tall and wide. It looks like a caterpillar made of frosting, and there's something almost comical about it, but I know the next step will transform it. I take my small offset spatula. It's metal, with a thin, flexible blade, and a black plastic handle, and I begin to pull and push at the icing, creating random peaks and swirls and texture. The spatula makes a soft scraping sound as it moves through the icing, and the icing itself responds beautifully to this manipulation, forming into stiff peaks that lean and curve, creating the exact effect I was hoping for. It looks like snow that's been shaped by wind, with drifts and curves and natural randomness. At the very ends of the roof peak, where the icing extends beyond the actual gingerbread, I use the spatula to pull the icing downward slightly, creating the impression of snow that's beginning to drip or slide. These will become icicles in a moment, when I add the final touches. And speaking of icicles, this is one of my favorite details, and I've been looking forward to it. I take my piping bag fitted with the smallest round tip I have, barely larger than a pin, and I fill it with slightly thinned white icing, consistency somewhere between what I used for the shingles and the thinnest icing I prepared. This needs to flow but also hold a shape. Starting at the edge of the roof, where the snow accumulation would naturally begin to melt and refreeze, I pipe a thin line of icing straight down, perhaps an inch long, tapering it to a point at the bottom. An icicle. I pipe another next to it, this one slightly shorter, then a longer one. I work my way along the entire roof edge, creating a forest of icicles in varying lengths, some thick at the base and tapering dramatically, others thin and delicate throughout their length. The icicles need to look natural, which means they need to be irregular. I vary not just their length but also their starting positions. Some hang from the very edge of the roof, others start a little higher up, from the accumulated snow on the roof line. Some hang perfectly straight, while others curve slightly, as if being pushed by a breeze. This work requires a very steady hand and a lot of patience. Each icicle takes only a few seconds to pipe, but there are dozens of them, and each one needs individual attention. The tiniest variation in pressure will affect the width of the line, and I have to lift the piping bag away at just the right moment to create that perfect tapered point. But oh, the result is worth every moment of effort. When I finish the last icicle and step back to look at the roof in its entirety, I feel a rush of satisfaction so pure it's almost physical. The roof is no longer just a roof. It's a miniature winter scene, complete with colorful shingles peeking through a heavy blanket of snow with thick drifts along the peak with delicate icicles hanging in crystalline rows along the eaves. It's beautiful. It's actually genuinely beautiful. I allow myself a moment to simply appreciate this, to feel the pride of creation, before I move on to the next phase, decorating the walls. The walls of the house offer different opportunities for creativity than the roof. Here, I want to create texture and interest without overwhelming the surface. I'm imagining a cottage-like exterior, perhaps with a pebbled or stucco effect, and with carefully piped details around the windows and door. I've drawn window and door outlines on the gingerbread before assembly, just light pencil marks that are barely visible but enough to guide me now. The windows are simple rectangles, 2 on the front wall and 1 on each side wall. The door is in the center of the front wall, slightly larger than the windows. I start with the windows, and I decide to use a technique called flooding to create the appearance of glass panes. Using my thinnest icing, I carefully pipe an outline around each window, defining its edges with a thin line of white. Then, working quickly before the outline can crust over, I fill in the interior of the window with the same thin icing, using the piping tip to spread it evenly to all corners. The icing flows to fill the space, settling into a smooth, glossy surface that, when it dries, will actually look remarkably like glass, or at least like a stylized representation of glass. I repeat this process for all 4 windows, and then I have to stop and wait again for these to set. If I try to add more decoration while the icing is still wet, I risk disturbing it, creating ripples or marks in what should be a smooth surface. While I wait, I turn my attention to creating window trim. I tint a small amount of icing with just a touch of red food coloring, creating a pale pink that will serve as a contrasting accent color. Using a medium round tip, I pipe a border around each window, right along the edges where the gingerbread meets the white glass. This pink trim makes the windows pop, giving them definition and visual interest. But I don't stop there. I add tiny shutters to each window, piping 2 vertical lines of pink icing on either side of each window, then adding small horizontal lines across them to create the impression of wooden slats. The effect is charming. Suddenly, these aren't just windows. They're cottage windows with decorative shutters, the kind you might see on a storybook house in the countryside. For added detail, I pipe tiny windowsills beneath each window using the same pink icing, creating a small horizontal ledge that protrudes just slightly from the wall. And then, because I can't resist, I add minuscule window boxes filled with flowers. Tiny dots of green icing for foliage, with even tinier dots of red and yellow on top representing blooms. These details are almost absurdly small, but they matter. They're the difference between a simple decorated cookie and a miniature scene that tells a story. Now for the door, and this is where I want to get really creative. Instead of simply piping a door shape or flooding it with icing, I'm going to construct an actual 3-dimensional door using pretzel sticks. I select the straightest pretzel sticks from my supply, examining each one and setting aside any that are too curved or broken. Pretzels are never perfectly uniform. They're organic, irregular, which actually works in my favor here because it will make the door look more rustic, more handmade. I need 7 pretzel sticks of approximately equal length to create the door planks, and I carefully arrange them on a small plate, lining them up vertically. Using my thick structural icing, I pipe a generous line along one long edge of the first pretzel stick, then press a second pretzel stick against it, pressing firmly to ensure a good bond. The icing squeezes out just slightly, and I can see it there, white against the brown of the pretzels, already beginning to set. I continue this process, adding pretzel sticks one by one until I have a solid rectangle of pretzels all bonded together, creating what looks remarkably like a door made of vertical wooden planks. But I need to add horizontal support pieces to make it look more authentic. I take 2 more pretzel sticks and carefully break them to the appropriate width, slightly wider than the door itself. The pretzels snap with a satisfying crack, and I'm left with straight pieces that will serve as crossbeams. I pipe icing across the back of the door in 2 horizontal lines, then press these crossbeam pretzels into place, creating that classic door construction pattern where vertical planks are held together by horizontal supports. The door needs to dry in this configuration before I can attach it to the house, so I set it aside carefully and use this waiting time to work on other wall decorations. I want to create texture on the walls themselves, a sort of stucco or pebbled effect that will add visual interest without being too busy. Using my medium consistency white icing and a round tip, I begin piping small dots all over the wall surfaces, creating a random, organic pattern. Each dot is about the size of a pea, and I vary their placement, clustering some closer together while leaving other areas more sparse. The dots have a 3-dimensional quality, rising up from the flat surface of the gingerbread, and as they begin to dry, they maintain this raised texture. This is painstaking work, requiring hundreds of individual dots, but it's also oddly satisfying. Pipe, release, move. Pipe, release, move. The dots appear one by one, gradually covering the brown gingerbread with white texture. I work around the windows carefully, avoiding the areas I've already decorated, creating a textured background that makes the smooth windows and trim stand out even more. My hand begins to cramp slightly from the repetitive squeezing motion, so I pause, setting down the piping bag and flexing my fingers, rotating my wrist. Outside, the snow continues to fall, and I notice that the accumulation on the windowsill has grown deeper. The world outside looks absolutely silent, muffled and quiet, and inside, in this pool of warm light, I continue my detailed work. After about 10 minutes of rest, I pick up the piping bag again and continue the texturing process on the remaining walls. The back wall, which won't be visible once the house is positioned, still receives the same careful attention as the front. There's a principle here, a philosophy of craftsmanship. Do the work right even in the places no one will see. The integrity of the whole matters more than the visibility of the parts. When the walls are completely covered in their textured dots, I turn my attention back to the pretzel door, which has been setting while I worked. I pick it up carefully, testing its stability, and I'm pleased to find that the pretzel sticks have bonded together solidly. This is no longer 7 separate pieces. It's a unified whole, a proper door. I pipe a thick line of icing along the back of the door, then carefully position it over the door outline I drew earlier on the front wall. I press it gently into place, holding it there for a full minute to ensure the bond takes. The door adheres beautifully, and when I release it, it stays exactly where I placed it, projecting slightly from the wall surface in a satisfyingly 3-dimensional way. But a door needs hardware, needs details that make it look functional even though it will never open. I use my tiniest piping tip to add a doorknob, just a small dot of icing positioned where a doorknob would logically be. And then, using that same tiny tip, I pipe thin lines across the door horizontally, creating the impression of the wood grain or decorative metal strapping that you might find on a rustic cottage door. Above the door, I want to add a wreath. It's winter after all, and a festive wreath seems appropriate. I switch to my green-tinted icing and pipe a circle above the door, perhaps 3 inches in diameter. The circle doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, a slightly irregular circle looks more natural, more like actual foliage. Then I pipe small teardrops of green icing all around this circle, pointing outward, creating the appearance of leaves or pine boughs. The teardrops overlap slightly, building up layers and dimension. For the wreath decorations, I use tiny red candies, cinnamon imperials, those small, intensely spicy candies that are perfect for representing berries. I press them into the green icing at regular intervals around the wreath, and I add a small bow at the bottom using pink icing, piping 2 loops and 2 tails. The effect is festive and charming, and it draws the eye to the door, making it a focal point of the house's front facade. I step back to assess my progress. The house is really taking shape now. The roof is spectacular with its shingled pattern and snowy accents. The walls are textured and interesting. The windows gleam with their smooth glass panes and pink trim. The door looks solid and welcoming with its wreath above. But I'm far from finished. The base of the house, where it meets the parchment paper, looks abrupt and unfinished. I need to create a transition, to make it seem like this house exists in a landscape rather than just sitting on a flat surface. This is where I'll create the yard, the surrounding environment, the context that will make this house feel like a real place. I start by piping a thick layer of white icing all around the base of the house, creating what will become snow-covered ground. This isn't smooth, careful piping. This is rough, textured application, meant to look natural and wind-blown. I use a large round tip and generous amounts of icing, and I work quickly, building up layers and peaks, creating drifts and mounds that suggest deep snow accumulation. As I work my way around the house, I extend the snow outward from the building, creating a yard perhaps 6 inches deep on all sides. The icing piles up in irregular ways, just as real snow would, with some areas deeper than others, some areas smooth, while others are textured and rough. While this base layer is still wet, I begin adding dimensional elements to the landscape. I create a path leading to the door using candies. Small, flat, round peppermints that I press into the icing in a curving line from the edge of my work area to the doorstep. Each peppermint becomes a stepping stone, and I vary their placement slightly so the path looks organic rather than rigidly geometric. The red and white spiral pattern of the peppermints creates a cheerful contrast against the white snow. On one side of the house, I decide to create a small tree. I start with a pretzel stick as the trunk, breaking it to an appropriate height, perhaps 4 inches tall, and pressing it firmly into the wet icing so it stands vertically. For the foliage, I use my green icing to pipe a triangular shape around the top of the trunk, building up layers of green teardrops that point downward, overlapping them to create a full pine tree effect. It's not botanically accurate, but it's charming and recognizable, and that's what matters. I add another tree on the opposite side of the house, this one slightly shorter, and then a third even smaller one in the back, creating a little grove. Each tree gets the same treatment, a pretzel trunk, layers of green icing foliage, and then, because it's winter, I add snow to the trees. Using white icing and a light touch, I pipe small amounts of white onto the green branches, letting it drip down slightly, creating the impression of snow that's settled into the boughs. Between 2 of the trees, I create a tiny fence using more pretzel sticks. I break them into small, equal pieces and press them into the icing vertically, creating fence posts. Then I use thin lines of piped icing to connect them horizontally, creating rails. It's a simple fence, nothing elaborate, but it adds structure to the landscape and suggests that this house exists in a tended, cared-for space. Near the fence, I add a tiny snowman, and this makes me smile even as I create it. Using white icing, I pipe 3 circles of decreasing size, stacked vertically, the classic snowman shape. For eyes and buttons, I use tiny chocolate chips, pressing them gently into the wet icing. A small orange candy becomes a carrot nose. And for the arms, I use the thinnest pretzel sticks I can find, breaking them to appropriate length and inserting them into the sides of the middle snowball. The snowman needs a scarf, so I use a thin line of red icing piped around his neck area, with 2 tails hanging down. And for a finishing touch, a tiny hat made from a black licorice piece, carefully cut and positioned on top of his head. He's adorable, this little snowman, with his jaunty hat and friendly face, and he adds a sense of whimsy to the scene. I continue building out the landscape, adding details wherever inspiration strikes. Here, a cluster of candy rocks made from malted milk balls partially buried in the snow. There, A small bird feeder made from a lifesaver candy mounted on a pretzel stick, with tiny dots of chocolate for birdseed scattered around its base. Everywhere I look, I see opportunities for small stories, tiny details that suggest life and activity and care. Along one side of the house, I create a wood pile. Using small pieces of pretzel sticks, all cut to the same length, I stack them in a careful pile, using dabs of icing to hold them in place. The natural brown of the pretzels looks remarkably like wood, and the pile itself suggests preparation for winter, a practical detail that makes the scene feel more real. I'm working faster now, caught up in the creative flow, and my hands move with practiced confidence. I know instinctively how much pressure to apply, what consistency of icing to use for which application, how to position elements for maximum visual impact. This is not my first gingerbread house. I've made dozens over the years, but each one is different. Each one offers new challenges and new opportunities for creativity. The landscape now extends several inches beyond the house on all sides, creating a complete miniature scene. The white icing snow covers everything except where I've deliberately added other elements, and the overall effect is one of a house nestled into a winter landscape, surrounded by its small world of trees and fences and pathways. But I'm not satisfied yet. The snow itself needs more texture, more visual interest. I want to create the impression of fresh, untouched snow with that subtle sparkle that real snow has when light hits the ice crystals. I reach for my container of sanding sugar, that coarse, crystalline sugar that catches and reflects light. Unscrewing the lid, I hold the container over the house and begin to sprinkle the sugar carefully, watching it fall like real snow onto the landscape below. The sugar crystals catch and stick wherever they touch wet icing, and they add an instant sparkle, a shimmer that transforms the entire scene. I sprinkle more heavily on the roof, adding extra sparkle there, and I make sure to dust all the horizontal surfaces. The snowdrifts, the tree branches, the snowman's body. The sound of the sugar falling is almost inaudible, just a soft whisper, like actual snow settling. After the sanding sugar, I add the final snow effect: shredded coconut. I take a small handful of the white thread-like strands and begin to sprinkle them over the scene, watching them fall and settle in random, organic patterns. The coconut looks remarkably like real snow, with its irregular strands and white color, and it adds a softness, a texture that contrasts beautifully with the hard candies and smooth icing. I'm generous with the coconut, letting it fall wherever it wants to land, and I even press some of it gently into areas of wet icing to make sure it adheres. The coconut clings to the roof, piles up around the base of the trees, settles onto the snowman's shoulders. It's the perfect finishing touch, and as I step back to look at the scene, I realize I'm actually holding my breath. The gingerbread house is complete. It sits there on the parchment paper, transformed utterly from the plain brown pieces I started with hours ago. It's a miniature world now, a complete scene that tells a story of winter comfort and holiday magic. The roof with its candy shingles peeks through its blanket of snow. Icicles hang in crystalline rows from the eaves. The windows glow in their frames, suggesting warmth inside. The door with its welcoming wreath invites approach. The landscape surrounding the house, with its trees and fence, its snowman and woodpile, its winding candy path, creates context and narrative. And the sparkle. Oh, the sparkle. The sanding sugar and coconut catch the warm light from the cabinet strips, creating points of brightness throughout the scene, exactly like real snow reflecting moonlight or street light. It's magical. There's no other word for it. I realize my back aches slightly from bending over the table for so long, and when I check the clock, I'm startled to discover that nearly 3 hours have passed since I began. 3 hours that felt like 30 minutes, time compressed and expanded simultaneously in that strange way that happens when you're fully absorbed in creative work. I pull out one of the kitchen chairs and sit down heavily, suddenly aware of my fatigue. My hands are sticky with dried icing, and there are smears of powdered sugar on my sleeves. A few rogue coconut shreds cling to my shirt. I'm a mess, but I don't care. I'm staring at what I've created, and I feel a sense of accomplishment that's almost overwhelming. There's something profound about making things with your hands, about taking raw materials and transforming them into something beautiful. In our modern world, so much of what we interact with is mass-produced, created by machines in factories far away. But this is different. Every element of this gingerbread house bears the mark of human touch, of individual decision-making, of creative problem-solving and artistic vision. No two people would decorate a house exactly the same way. This house is uniquely mine, a reflection of my aesthetic choices and creative impulses. But more than that, there's the process itself, the slow, meditative work of building and decorating, the focus required, the patience demanded. In creating this house, I've been forced to slow down, to pay attention, to be present. There's been no room for distraction or multitasking. Each candy placed, each line piped, each detail added has required my full attention. And in giving that attention, in focusing so completely on this small task, I've found a kind of peace. My mind, usually so busy with its endless stream of thoughts and worries and plans, has been quiet for these hours. There's been only the work, only the next step, only the immediate challenge of creating something beautiful. And now, looking at the finished house, I feel not just proud, but also grateful. Grateful for the time, grateful for the materials, grateful for the ability to create, grateful even for the late hour and the quiet house that allowed me this uninterrupted space for making. The snow outside has stopped falling while I worked, and the world beyond the window is still and white and silent. Inside, the house is warm, and the Christmas tree lights continue their patient twinkling in the next room. I stand up slowly, stretching, and walk to the sink to wash my hands. The warm water feels good on my sticky fingers, and I watch the icing dissolve and swirl down the drain, white spirals against the stainless steel. With clean, dry hands, I return to the table and very carefully lift the parchment paper by its edges, transferring the entire gingerbread scene to a large serving platter that I've set nearby for this purpose. The house moves as one piece, stable and solid, and I position it in the center of the platter, where it can be displayed and admired. From this new vantage point, with the house on the platter instead of directly on the table, I can see it more as a viewer would, more as a complete piece rather than a work in progress. And it's even more impressive from this perspective. The details that I agonized over, the tiny window boxes, the snowman's scarf, the wood grain on the door, all come together into a cohesive whole. Nothing looks out of place or forced. Everything belongs. I think about tomorrow, when daylight will reveal the house in natural light rather than this warm, artificial glow. I think about showing it to my family, seeing their faces when they discover what I've created in the quiet hours of the night. I imagine their delight, their surprise, their appreciation of all the tiny details. But even if no one else saw it, even if this house remained my secret, the act of creating it would have been worthwhile. The value isn't in the finished product alone. It's in the process, in the doing, in the hours spent in focused, creative work. There's a lesson here, something about patience and attention, and the value of slow work in a fast world. Something about the satisfaction of creating with your own hands, of building something piece by piece rather than seeking instant results. Something about finding peace in focus, about the meditative quality of repetitive, detailed work. But I'm too tired now to articulate these thoughts fully. They exist more as feelings than as words, more as understanding in my body than concepts in my mind. I turn off the cabinet lights, leaving only the glow from the Christmas tree to illuminate the kitchen. The gingerbread house sits on its platter in this softer light, and somehow it looks even more magical now, even more like something from a storybook or a dream. The sparkle of the sanding sugar catches the colored lights from the tree, now red, now green, now blue, and the house seems to glow from within with borrowed light. Outside, a fresh snow has begun to fall again, just a light dusting, and I stand at the window for a moment watching it. Each flake is unique, they say, though I can't verify that from here. But I like the idea of it. Billions of unique creations, each one different, each one beautiful in its own way, falling silent and soft to blanket the world in white. I'm tired now, deeply tired, with that good exhaustion that comes from creative work rather than mere exertion. My body is ready for rest, ready for sleep. But my mind is quiet, settled, peaceful in a way that it often isn't at the end of a normal day. There's a satisfaction here, a completeness, a sense of having done something worthwhile with my time and energy. I take one last look at the gingerbread house, committing it to memory. The way the light plays across its candy-studded surfaces, the shadows cast by the little trees, the cheerful face of the snowman, the welcoming door with its festive wreath. Tomorrow I'll take photographs, probably, to preserve this scene. But tonight, this moment, I just want to see it with my own eyes and hold it in my own memory. The house will last for a few days, maybe a week if we're careful with it. Eventually, the icing will dry and harden completely, and the house will become more artifact than food, more decoration than dessert. And eventually, after the holidays pass, it will be disassembled and discarded, returned to the raw materials from which it came. But that's okay. That's part of the beauty of it, actually, the impermanence, the temporality. This house exists right now, in this moment, perfect and complete. And that's enough. I turn away from the table and walk slowly through the quiet house toward the stairs. My hands smell of sugar and vanilla, and there's still a faint stickiness to my fingers despite the washing. The scent will linger until tomorrow's shower, a sweet reminder of tonight's work. As I climb the stairs, I think about sleep. Deep, restful sleep earned through creative focus and patient work. My mind is already beginning to drift, thoughts becoming less linear, more associative. I think of snow falling, of icing flowing, of candies gleaming. I think of small details mattering, of slow work producing beauty, of hours passing in what feels like minutes when you're absorbed in something you love. The gingerbread house sits downstairs in the kitchen, a small testament to patience and creativity, a miniature world created piece by piece, detail by detail, with care and attention and time. Tomorrow it will delight others. Tonight, it has already given me something valuable. Hours of peaceful focus, a sense of accomplishment, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from making something beautiful with your own hands. And now, it's time to rest. Time to let the day's creativity settle into dreams. Time to close my eyes and drift into sleep, carrying with me the sweet scent of gingerbread and icing, the memory of candy colors and sugar sparkle, the gentle satisfaction of work well done. The house is silent around me as I settle into bed. Outside, the snow continues its quiet fall, blanketing the world in white. Inside, downstairs in the kitchen, a gingerbread house stands complete and beautiful, ready to bring joy to anyone who sees it. And up here, in this quiet room, I close my eyes and let sleep come, welcoming it like an old friend, grateful for this day and this night and this small, perfect creation. The last thing I see in my mind as I, before sleep claims me, is the gingerbread house in all its decorated glory. The shingled roof, the snowy drifts, the welcoming door, the tiny snowman with his jaunty hat. It's an image of comfort and creativity, of patience and peace. And it follows me down into dreams, where perhaps I'll create other things, other beautiful small worlds, other testaments to the value of slow, careful, loving work. Sleep comes softly, gently, like snow falling on a quiet night, and I welcome it, grateful for this day of creation, ready for rest, at peace with the world and with myself. If this story resonated with you, if the quiet process of creation brought you some measure of peace, please consider showing your support with a like, and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys. May your dreams be as sweet as sugar and as peaceful as falling snow.